There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and this is my second long-form interview with Saskatchewan, Western Canada's most, what would we say, libelous writer?
Libelous, scandalous.
Scandalous?
Yeah, infamous.
I was going to use scandalous for the next interview.
Okay, good.
I've got a whole stack of adjectives. David Carpenter, former professor of mine, and it's been an absolute delight to get to know him all over again, having these chats. So today we are here to talk about his 1996 memoir called Courting Saskatchewan. The subtitle is A Celebration of Winter Feasts, Summer Loves, and Rising Brookies. And I'll just repeat what I said in our last chat, which is that I came across this book at exactly the right time in my life, moving back to Saskatoon a year and a half ago, and found this book. I think it was at the Symphony book sale, and read it in August of 2022 as I was living back in Saskatoon for the first time since the early 90s and back in Canada after almost 15 years in Japan. And this book was like a guidebook.
Really?
It was wonderful. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
So it came at just the right time. I've asked Dave to get us started by reading the first three paragraphs from the preface.
Okay, here we go. Courting Saskatchewan is an example of creative documentary. Nothing new, really. It means that I approach this material as a writer rather than as a historian or a news reporter. It also means that I remain truthful to the facts as I've known them, so long as they serve the story. But when real life intrudes with its humdrum little tyrannies, I tend to become creative. Let's be honest here. I tend to lie outright. In this act of stubborn defiance, I join hands with some venerable liars. Farley Mowat, who is alleged to have exaggerated some facts about his adventures in the North. Henry David Thoreau, who is alleged to have exaggerated about the extent of his isolation at Walden Pond. Paul Corrington, who claims to be truthful about the size of his fish. This list could be extended well into next year. It's worse than you think. This book is only as honest and fact-driven as the average Canadian tax return. Think of our personal income tax returns as a form of literary narrative, a plausible representation of real life, rigorous about facts and figures, but inventive when it needs to be.
Wonderful. So basically, what you're saying is this is all BS?
Absolutely.
I don't think so, but I wanted to start with that because I believe this is the first work of nonfiction that you wrote or published, aside from essays, maybe?
Yes, I have a book of essays. I think you alluded to them, Writing Home.
Yes.
But this is probably the first sustained nonfiction
memoir. So primarily you were a writer of fiction, and then you came to writing this book, which is a work of memoir. So I'd like you to talk more about what it was like to make that transition and why you felt
Sure.
the need to give us such a funny but what's the word I'm looking for,
Scandalous.
and all bets are off. There's a fancy legal word for that.
Oh yes. I too have lost that word.
Yes.
Actionable, perhaps,
Or something. Yes.
Yeah, I should explain that first. I've tried the business of remembering something and writing it down, and trying as hard as I can to write down my memory of it. But ultimately, that's just a memory of something. That's not exactly how it happened. So I've given up trying to be overly scrupulous about a memory that fades a bit with every year. And so in most cases, I think I got it right. But if I had my brother here, if my parents were still alive, oh, no, Dave, no, it didn't happen that way. So I'm afraid, dear reader, you're stuck with me. I did in one chapter, however, lie strategically, shall we say. It's the one called Nature's Rejection Slip, in which I try to catch a brown trout, a huge brown trout.
Yes.
That's a composite of many trout and many streams and many failures with my fly rod. And if you tried to find the stream that this huge brown trout was lying in, you wouldn't find it, because there are better representations of that stream in other places in the Surface Hills and in other places in Alberta as well.
But I think probably in every version, including the true version, your better half didn't really believe your story.
Oh, I hope not. I mean, she's not that gullible.
So tell us briefly and as colorfully as however you want to tell us, how did you come to live in Saskatoon?
Well, it was quite interesting. I was born and raised in Edmonton, and I got my master's in the States and came back to Edmonton to get rid of my student debt. And so for a while I taught school in Edmonton, and then decided it's now or never. I better do my PhD while I'm still young enough to stand up to the rigors of graduate studies. And so I did that. And then a really lucky thing happened. I won a postdoc for 2 years at the University of Manitoba, which means I got lots of stuff written and off and published when I came to apply. And I had really weird letters of recommendation. One of them was from Dorothy Livesey, who in those days was a big name in poetry. And I had befriended her, she had befriended me, and I had found a place for her to live, a beautiful cottage on the river, and she really loved that favor a lot. And so she wrote a glowing letter on my behalf. Another one was from John Tunison, the head of the English department. I had been teaching in prison at Stony Mountain, and one day as I was teaching Moby Dick, an instructor next to my classroom was murdered. I heard a ruckus outside, closed the door, kept on teaching Moby Dick. Found out later that night the ruckus was the murder of a beloved instructor named Stanley Green. Anyhow, the next morning I came in, the whole jail was pretty much shut down and very quiet, therefore. So walking through these corridors where ordinarily there'd be lots of prisoners going by, I was walking almost alone. And then I came to my classroom, and there were my 14 students waiting for me, hoping that I would show up. And so I didn't know what to say to start off, Well, you guys are having a rough time of it, I bet you, that sort of stuff. It would have sounded kind of perfunctory and kind of, I don't know. So I just started teaching Moby Dick again. And I remember teaching a chapter called The Tale of the Whale. And suddenly, these hands went up. Suddenly, a discussion was going. Suddenly, they would argue with each other about stuff in Moby Dick. One guy said, I think, how come, oh Lord, I've lost a name. They argued about why he had to die, because he was such a nice guy. One of the brightest students in the class says, well, look, if it was this nameless character who remained alive and our narrator, Ishmael, who died, well, who would tell the story? Who would, and another guy says, look, you guys are crazy. It's Herman Melville who tells the story. It says here on the front cover. So they were starting to explore narrative technique without being aware that it was a study of narrative technique. Anyway, 3 hours on a hot afternoon when ordinarily they'd be yawning quite a lot in the last hour. We didn't want to stop. But finally, I left, and I walked out of the jail and out to my car about 1 foot off the ground. It was the best teaching experience I've ever had. And not because I'm a master pedagogue, but because they needed something like a bartender and a shrink and a friend up there to remind them of another world of books and ideas and arts and letters that was denied them in their ordinary lives. Yeah. So I got a great letter of reference from the department head. He says, and Carpenter, he didn't stay home like everybody else. He stayed fine. And I didn't think I had a chance. I thought I'd get fired if I didn't show up. So anyway, I got another really weird letter of recommendation. And then there was a third one, but it wasn't the scholarly David Carpenter that got the job. It was something much more eccentric. And I had specialties like I was familiar with teaching native students. And so I got the job. That's how I came to live in Saskatoon. By the way, my parents courted and mated in Saskatoon. So I can claim some kind of Saskatoon citizenship.
You were conceived here.
Yes.
And so I don't know how much BS went into the description of that apartment building, but if it's true, I would probably be able to find it if I wandered around downtown.
Oh, you would?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They should put up a plaque.
They should.
David Carpenter was conceived here.
I'm going to write that idea down. That's
fantastic.
Yeah, just be north of 25th Street.
Yeah, I know some of those buildings.
Yeah, lovely old buildings. So I guess I see myself as a kind of salmon migrating back to the original feeder stream where I was conceived, and I've lived here ever since.
And I'm beginning to understand where your colorful personality comes from those eccentric letters of reference. You had a reputation to maintain.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. Yeah.
So, the book is entitled Courting Saskatchewan. What does it mean to court a place or a province or a region?
In my own case, courting a region had a really big challenge. Saskatchewan, to me, in the 50s, 60s, 70s or so, was that place you drove through as fast as you could to get to the mountains in Alberta or culture in Winnipeg. And so a certain effort, I think, was involved in me learning to like and then to love passionately the province I had inherited. And in the first year, I may have mentioned to you in our last interview, I was formerly from Alberta and did a lot of hiking in the mountains. And I said to everybody who asked, I really miss the mountains. I wish we had mountains in Saskatchewan. And I became one of those objectionable people that no one wants to talk to because they don't want to live where they are living. But in the following year, I met writers galore, and the courtship began. And after living there for quite a number of years, about 20 years or so, I got a sense of the rhythms of each year, the rhythms, the glories of each month.
That's right.
And one of the hardest months to court, who resisted my attempts at courtship at first, was January because it's so damn cold.
Yes, but that's before you knew that January is my birthday month. So now, it's a happy time.
Oh, no wonder I liked it. No wonder. Yeah.
I want to get into winter in a minute. I can't believe I'm saying this. But I want to do a follow-up question on the courting thing, because the phrase in that part of the book is that courting a place involves seeking out the recurrent virtues, or if you will, the rituals. Can you say a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think that everywhere you go, there are folk rituals, ancient rituals, modern day rituals, recurring festivities, if you like, recurring adventures that are appropriate to a certain season and even to a certain month. December, Hanukkah and Christmas, these have rituals to them in December. Another ritual is the fishing season opens in June. Hundreds of people head for the north or head for the streams and go fishing. And that has been ritualized because there are certain expectations each time you go there. And I had to find that out about Saskatchewan. What is a good ritual for March, for example? March is an ill-defined month. It's still winter, but it wants to be spring. And I noticed that that's when the very first geese arrive. So we would be looking for the first geese and the first crows, the avant-garde, you might say, ahead of the big flocks. And that to me was a tiny but very enjoyable ritual. Or watching the sharp-tailed grouse mate in their leks in the spring.
Hold that thought. I want you to tell a little bit of that story, because that's another one of my favorite parts of the book. So the memoir is broken up into sections or parts for each season. And in the winter part, you talk about your Christmas parties or your winter parties, and they sounded wonderful. So I want to ask you, do you still have them?
Well, we still have one gathering in December on Christmas Eve, and my wife had a mother who was from the northern uplands in England. She was a village girl, and they had a certain feast at that time of the year. It involves a lot of sausages and much else as well. And all of my friends are drinkers, but this was a tea to celebrate the season. And so we don't have a very large table, but we managed to fit. This year we're going to fit 11 people around our table, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. Ordinarily, the feast that I described here that has vanished because it was much too big for us to handle. Some people are terrific at entertaining. We're about D plus C minus entertainers.
Well, it sounded like a really fun party to me, the way you wrote it. So
yeah.
We're not even going to set this up. Please read a section from this winter section, which is self-explanatory, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
You bet. On walking in January, Kiever, that is to say, Honor Kiever, my wife,
Yes.
Kiever and I crossed the Broadway Bridge on our way to the downtown library. We both have on blue coats. We both have our hoods up. Frozen on the collars of both our coats is a fine, pure white layer of breath. Conversation is difficult, though not impossible. She turns to me, nudges my arm, and I turn to her. Face to face, she tells me that she has no feeling in her legs. That was one. Number two, when you walk out in the cold, for whatever reason, you wear boots, not shoes, and as you go, your boots squeak, as though with each step you have tromped on a gopher. February's sound is more of a crunch, as though you were stepping on the corpse of a gopher. 3. I'm getting morbid. I've got to stop this. There's less snow in Saskatchewan than up in the mountains or out in the Maritimes or on the Ontario snowbelt. Fewer real blizzards. There's a drier and less penetrating brand of cold, but the winters are longer, colder, and more forbidding. In fact, as I've mentioned, they last for 5 months. Not to labor the point, but this is a long, bloody time to be holed up with an Afghan on the sofa and a TV set. The idea is to get out into the coldest and most forbidding stretch of winter. The idea, especially in January, is to make winter user-friendly. You can do it if you can turn the snow into your friend. That's the whole secret right there. Make friends with the snow. One way to do this is to build a great big snow hut. As a kid, I had plenty of experience with snow huts that were neither caves nor igloos. We would find a big pile of shoveled snow and tunnel in. My memory of such huts is that they were kind of cozy, but scarcely the sort of thing you'd want to spend the night in. The Dene name for this structure is Quingy. 2 years ago in Saskatchewan, the snow was pretty abundant in January. Kiever and Will and I were getting shack-wacky, so one cold afternoon I went out into the backyard and waded into the snow for my annual inspection. Sometimes the snowfall is really stingy because winter droughts in Saskatchewan are just as common as summer droughts. But this time the snow was perfect. It came all the way up to my knees, and in the drifts and cornices around the fence and the garage, the snow was almost a yard deep. I got a scoop shovel out of the garage and began to build a modest pile right in the middle of our vegetable garden. When the pile was large enough to be seen from our kitchen window, I went inside and told Kiever. She knew what was coming. I had acquired that fanatic, otherworldly gleam in my eyes. One thinks of that guy played by Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. From this point on, my mood would soar or crash solely in relation to the size of that little mountain outside. So Kiever set out to add her energies to the effort. Will saw this one coming and excused himself before he too was drawn in by the scoop shovel madness. And so we build a house of snow.
A quingy. I had never heard this word before, and I just loved reading about this. There is a philosophy behind what you're saying about making the snow your friend that I absolutely loved. But the act of building it and what it was like. Tell us what it was like once it's built. People, you can go inside and you're kind of warm.
Yeah, it's amazing. The key to a quingy is that, like an igloo, the place where people gather is the top half of the pile of snow. The bottom half is just the floor and the place where you ascend into the upper half. And so with people there and candles burning, slowly you get warmth pushing down. So it's building up from our bodies and the candles, and then it grows and grows, and it pushes the cold air out. And this is not an exaggeration. You can, on a day that's 30, 35 below, you can get inside, sit there, light the candles, your friends are in there too, and not too long after that, you can actually take off your winter coat and keep it off throughout the entire celebration or conversation or poetry reading or whatever you're doing in the quinzy. It's that warm.
Didn't you sleep in it overnight?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've slept several times in quincy. Kiever is more daring than I am. She's done it quite a few times, but I've done it a few times as well, and it was.
So was this was an annual thing that you would do?
Yes, it was an annual thing. Yeah.
Snowfall permitting, like some winters
Right.
there wasn't enough snow to do it.
Sure.
But as long as there was enough snow.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, I really want to experience that, and I want
Yeah.
my Japanese husband to have that experience at least once after he
that-
moves here.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Absolutely great.
Sounds. Are there any Dene Quingy sex jokes?
Denny Quincy says, that was an ambush, wasn't it? I'll worry all night long because I couldn't get an answer.
Let's move into spring. You read about false springs, which makes me think of April is the cruelest month. I think that's what a false spring is. But
In Saskatchewan, that's what it is. You don't want to get too enthusiastic, too optimistic in spring. Optimism in Saskatchewan is different from optimism in other places. Optimism in Saskatchewan is a farmer saying, well, we might get a crop this year. Our optimism is a kind of guarded hope close to despair. So when there's a big melt on, you feel like Snoopy and doing the Snoopy dance, but you can't say to yourself or anyone else, oh, spring is here, because it's not. It's lying to you. And after a number of false springs, some days become so irrevocably warm that spring, you can't bring winter back anymore. And then you have spring, and it's very brief.
One of the delightful stories that you tell about spring is going out with Kiever and some friends outside of the city to see the Sharptails dance, and I don't even think I'd heard of Sharptails. I Googled it. So tell us about what are Sharptails, and do they actually dance?
Sharp-tailed grouse is what most people incorrectly call prairie chickens.
Okay.
And the prairie chickens in Saskatchewan have been extinct since about, 1920 or so. That's because there was so much farming in the south of the province that their habitat pretty much disappeared. So prairie chickens can be found in Nebraska and maybe South Dakota, places where there's lots of grassland and very little crops. But sharp-tailed grouse is a large, beautiful grouse that stays here all year long, and their mating rituals begin as early as March and more in April. What happens is the males stomp on their original leks, their original dancing grounds, and they are so cocky. Every one of them is sort of like Elvis, and
young Elvis.
And they do a lot of strutting. And the female sharptails gather around the edge of this amazing performance and look kind of bored. Yeah, they look like teenage girls at a hockey game. They'd like to meet the boys, but they could care less about hockey, And anyway, the males are the ones that strut. The males are the best looking ones. They're more talk and less fight. There's not a lot of fighting, but there's a certain kind of fainting where they do a kind of ritual fighting. And if you can get within, if you're lucky enough to get within 200 feet or so and you have binoculars, you can see the action up close.
Didn't you have to go out was it late at night or early in the morning? Wasn't it in the dark or something?
Very early in the morning, yeah. And if you're settled there before they gather, they don't bother with you. They don't worry about you because they've got sex on their mind. And they're trying to impress these teenage gals around the edge of the rink to convince them that they're the real thing.
You wrote it in such a humorous way. There was a comedy of errors about who was in the car and who wanted to do what and who was kind of grumpy or who was, it was just a really delightful part of the book. Have you done that recently?
Not recently. I suspect my capacity for getting up at 4 a.m. is severely limited now that I'm at the advanced age of, 39?
Yes, exactly. If one wanted to do it, it's still possible. Like they're still around, the sharptails.
Oh yeah. You look harder these days to find them. I mean, I know one place where you can find them consistently, but it's a place that I would never reveal to anybody else because there might be a hunter among their friends. Goes out there.
One of your summer rituals that's really interesting to me is you have often gone on writing retreats at St. Peter's Abbey. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. In fact, we used to go in the summertime, but now we go in the wintertime. And that's where we do our quinzies. You see, you've got a room full of writers who slave away at their manuscripts, and their bodies are crying out to them, "We need exercise. Take us for a walk." So I just happened to be standing at the exit door with a shovel in my hand and another shovel in my hand, and I can't shovel with 2 shovels. So as gently as possible, I suggest that they might want to join me. Isn't this what Tom Sawyer did to get people to whitewash the fence?
I think so.
Yeah, I would tell them you'd feel more fulfilled. Anyway, if you get 3 or 4 shovelers out there, that mound can go up in maybe 3 or 4 days. Okay. And once it's 7 feet high and much wider than 7 feet, you're ready to start digging in. My wife is the best grass level digger around. She can go right in there. Snow's falling all over her head. It doesn't faze her. She shoves it out between her legs and then starts to dig upwards. And pretty soon it's easier to go in, the rest of us, and take a turn at digging our way. The retreats at St. Pete's are a real delight. We know several of the monks out there. They're really kindly people, smart, fun, great storytellers, and they don't try to proselytize. They're just glad that we can come out and enjoy their place as much as possible. And if we go out in February, we start to see a difference in the birds arriving, especially at the end of February. And we see hundreds of deer sometimes in the orchard that come in to feed in the wintertime, stay alive. And some amazing things have happened to those deer over the years.
You used to go there to this retreat at St. Peter's in August, and now you go in February. So why did you go in August, and what was it about the summer that made you want to go there, and why did you switch it now into the winter?
Well, at first I was a prof, and I found that in the summer I had Fort San and other places to do my writing, especially at home. But when I was a full-time writer, I thought it would be far more fun to go out there in the wintertime. You get to know the retreatants, the other writers, artists really well. So the socializing after work each day was fun. And in winter, you're like a besieged nationality. It's like winter is closing in on you, and you need the comfort of other people around. And the stories are wonderful.
So in the fall section, there is a really dramatic and kind of scary experience you wrote about. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes, right. While I was writing this book, it happened.
Oh, wow.
And it happened in one of my favorite months. I believe it was right towards the end of September. I had some surgery done on my nose to clear away some cartilage, and it was a successful operation. Then I went up for my annual fishing trip with Keever and friends. I guess this was about 10 days after the operation, maybe 2 weeks. And I wasn't careful enough to take it easy, because after an operation like that, if you exert yourself too much, you could start the bleeding up all over again, which I guess I must have done. It was early in the morning. I was taking a walk, and I had what's known as a rabbit stick, and I was practicing throwing my rabbit stick as Northern Cree used to do to bring down rabbits and grouse and things like that. I stooped to pick up my rabbit stick, and a whole lot of blood was falling out of my nose. I've had nosebleeds before, but nothing like this. And it started spurting out. So I went back to the cabin, and the other guys were waking up, and I said, I think I've got a problem. No matter what I did to stem the bleeding, it just kept on gushing out. And so I would keep my nose plugged with a hanky or something, and then I'd be swallowing the blood. It was really quite awful. And one of the people there was a nurse named Julie Bidwell, who's sadly not with us any longer. And the guys were saying, oh, he'll be okay. He just needs another cold compress or something like that. He just needs to rest. And she said, if he falls asleep, he can drown in his blood. If he passes out, he will drown in his blood. We've got to get him to a physician. And so we jumped in a car driven by Paul Bidwell. And I discovered on that day he's a terrific race car driver. He really did very well. And the idea was to meet the ambulance halfway, and they would take over and take me back to the Nipawin Hospital, a tiny little hospital.
Because the lake you were at was quite far north and quite isolated from.
That's right.
No
it was
hospitals nearby.
Way up north. It was too far to go to Prince Albert, so off we went to Nipawin, and in I went, and they did their very best to stem the bleeding, and they were sort of half successful. Instead of swallowing a lot of blood every 10 minutes or so, it might be every hour or so. But clearly they couldn't stop the blood. They tried all kinds of cocaine up my nose, which is supposed to reduce the size of the arteries, I believe.
Wow.
But anyway, Honor stayed with me that night. And I think in the morning they realized we got to get this guy to the hospital real fast. And so they did. Came down to Saskatoon, and I had to stay in the hospital for about 5-6 days, I believe. And finally, the bleeding had stopped, and I looked like a vampire's victim. I was just as pale as, we couldn't be that pale unless you were dead. And I knew that all the vital signs were disappearing. I no longer could feel, when I got this bad bleed, I could no longer feel anything in my fingers, arms, my legs. Only the kind of the center of my body was still functioning. I think that's what happens when too much blood is lost. And then, according to Julie, I said what people say when they know they're dying. And I said to her, please tell Honor and Will I love them. I think the doctors nipped this one in the bud. And slowly back home, I started walking a bit and going out a little bit. And one warm day, Honor and I were sitting out in the backyard, and I asked her, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? That was my way of introducing what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And she said, I think I'd like to quit my job and just paint pictures. And I says, well, same here, babe. I'd like to quit my job and write books full time. Now, to me, that would be the ultimate luxury. And so not long after that conversation, as I got better and stronger, that's exactly what we did.
Right.
But September, even late September, it continues to be one of my two favorite months of the entire year. And I'll always remember that incident that started me on the road to being a full-time writer.
Yeah, it's a powerful part of the book near the end, and people should definitely check it out. You write a lot about your wife, Honor Keever. Tell us a little bit about her, and especially her as an artist.
Oh, well, I could take you down to see a couple of her paintings.
That would be great.
And you could put them on screen if you like.
Absolutely, that would be wonderful.
She was born in Idaho, and she lived in 7 or 8 different places in the States before her first husband got a job up at University of Saskatchewan. And she was tired of hot weather. She was living in Arizona, and she spent a lot of time in the deep south and southern Texas and things. So when she came up from Arizona, she was delighted that it was much, much cooler than down there. And as soon as she arrived in the month of June, same month and the same week I arrived in Saskatoon, although we never met until 1982. This is 1975. She was in a motel with her young son and her husband, and looking out and seeing these big lineups way into the night, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. So they went outside, and the lineups were at the Dairy Queen to get ice cream cones because it was really getting hot. And she thought that was the coolest thing. A ritual, you might say.
A ritual.
Yeah.
Literally cool, and
Yeah.
yes.
And one of the many things I love about her is she's really adventurous. She's up for anything. She isn't easily cowed by putting up a tent in hairy monster territory. Bears don't put her off. She loves long hikes. We've done hikes all over the place, all over the Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Texas Southwest, and especially Arizona. We've hiked on the West Coast. We've hiked in England. We walked across the entire country of England once. It took us 18 days at the skinniest part of England. So it seems to me that my life as a writer has been interrupted by the adventures that she plans for us. And I'm eternally grateful for her for doing that, because I would even be duller if I didn't have those wonderful road trips and those wonderful outdoor.
I have many adjectives for David Carpenter, but boring is not one of them.
Bless you.
Tell us a little bit about her art. What kind of art does she do? Paintings, I think, mostly, or exclusively, or
she started off as a photographer, and she did huge panels. There's a big elm tree out there. She would do a photograph of the elm tree or a photograph of our house, but it was broken up into many, many pictures and fractionated, and so that when you look at her photographs, they're less a photograph of the house and more a photograph of her memory of the house or her thoughts about the house. And she did several photography shows, and her second one, called The Brooding Rooms, which is now displayed, the Mendel Art Gallery sent it over to the Remy's, so you can see that at certain times.
At certain times.
Yeah. Right now, her third show, called Stations Along the Way, is in one of the university galleries in the basement of what used to be the administration building, Con Hall, and it looks fantastic. Anyway, she stopped doing photography because the chemicals. She did all her own darkroom work,
and stuff,
and then she went to oil painting, and that was a very, very successful part of her artistic practice. She got a lot of publicity across the country for her photographs, but the paintings, she would spend 3 to 5 years on one painting. she would list a painting, it would be gone. But that's no way to earn a living, as is writing no way to live. Anyhow, she's gone from these huge paintings to attempt much smaller paintings, maybe a bit bigger than this book. And that's a terrific challenge for her because she's always thought big, and now she has to think tiny.
I have lots of adjectives about David Carpenter. I have one adjective that's a bit strange for this book. I would call this the effect this book had on me. It was acclimatizing.
Oh, yes.
This book helped me to realize so many interesting new ways that I could make Saskatchewan home again. It's a beautiful, important memoir. Thank you for writing it, and thanks for chatting with me about it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Sean. Good gabbing with you.
Oh, just a delight.
We put his camera on the picture of your mother.
Oh, sure.
And if there's a little story that goes with the picture, why don't you talk to him?
Okay, yeah, but you have to come down.
Hello again. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. Nice to see you. And why does your husband call you Kiefer and not Honor? Or does he call you both?
He calls me, he usually just calls me Keeter.
Once in a while, I'll call her Honor. But when it's Kiever, it's Kiever!
Do you ever call her Your Honor? I bet you've heard all of them. This is honor and dishonor.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I've heard them all.
Yes, you've heard them all. I'm sorry, I apologize. So this is Honor Kiever. Hello, Honor. David's better half. And this is your incredible painting in the stairwell on the stairs. And it's built right into the wall. Can you tell us about it?
Well, it's my mother was she died, and so that's why I did this. It's like she's moving through a passageway.
It's just incredible. First time I came over here and started to come downstairs, I thought there was a person there. Like it's so realistic, and just such a moving picture. This is not a very interesting question, but I'm already worried about how do you move furniture up and down. I'd be so worried about about.
Well, I mean, it's put together. It's jerry rigged, you know.
You could take it out or cover it if you needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just wonderful. Do you have another one I can see?
Amazing one about Will. I know it's probably in storage up there, but I don't know.
Shall I go up?
Sure.
This is my son Will.
Oh. Oh, look at that. Oh. It's not a crystal ball. What is...
It's a snow globe.
It's a snow globe.
Yeah. And he's inside of the snow globe.
Trapped inside the snow globe.
Wow. The grape curtains, is that the right word for that color?
Yeah.
Any significance?
Well, it's called Looking Out at You.
Looking out at you.
And I always thought that he looked a little bit magic, like a swami or something like that. And with the globe there, I'm also reminded of an autistic person who's to some extent trapped within his own world.
Yeah, and he is autistic.
That's right. Wonderful. Thank you for showing me.